How does Gemma's power actually work in Insidious Out of the Further? Hello everyone, today we're going to explain one of the most important mysteries in Insidious Out of the Further. How does Gemma's supernatural power actually work? Before we continue, here's your spoiler alert. We're going into Gemma's ability, her connection to the Further, Cyrus's plan, and why her power makes her so important to the story. So, what exactly is Gemma's power? Gemma is a courier, a person with a rare supernatural ability to move between the real world and the Further. But her ability is more complicated than simply being able to enter the Further. The biggest difference is that Gemma can potentially bring things back with her, and that changes everything. Throughout the Insidious franchise, we've seen people who can project themselves into the Further. Elise Rainier is able to enter this supernatural realm. Dalton Lambert has the ability to astral project. But Gemma's power introduces another possibility. She can act almost like a bridge between the two worlds. The living world is on one side, the Further is on the other, and Gemma can cross that boundary. That's why Cyrus becomes so interested in her. He doesn't simply see Gemma as another person with psychic abilities, he sees her as a way to manipulate the barrier separating the living from the dead. And that's what makes her power so dangerous. Imagine the Further as a place normally separated from our world by a locked door. Most people can't even see the door. Some psychics can open it. But Gemma is different. She can actually pass through it, and potentially allow something else to pass through behind her. That's essentially what makes a courier so valuable. But there's an important limitation. Gemma doesn't necessarily control every entity that comes through. That's something Cyrus fails to understand. Her ability creates a connection. It doesn't automatically give her complete control over whatever is on the other side. And that's why using her power can be incredibly dangerous. The entities in the Further have their own intentions. Some are spirits, others are far more dangerous. And once that boundary becomes unstable, Gemma could potentially expose herself and everyone around her to those entities. That's also why the movie's title, Out of the Further, is so significant. Traditionally, the danger comes from characters going into the Further. They enter the realm to rescue someone or confront a supernatural entity. But Gemma's power reverses that relationship. Now the concern is what happens when something comes out. And that's exactly what Cyrus wants. He wants to exploit Gemma's ability to bring supernatural beings across the boundary. His obsession isn't really about Gemma herself. It's about what she represents. She is a doorway, and Cyrus wants to control that doorway. This also explains why Gemma's encounters with the entities become so important. The supernatural creatures aren't simply appearing randomly. They're connected to the larger conflict surrounding her ability. The more Gemma understands her power, the more she realizes that she has to be careful about what she allows through. Because once something crosses over, sending it back may not be simple. And that makes Gemma different from someone like Dalton. Dalton's ability primarily involves astral projection. He can separate his consciousness from his physical body and enter the Further. Gemma's power is more about crossing the boundary itself. That's a subtle difference, but it's extremely important. Dalton goes somewhere. Gemma connects two places. And because of that, Cyrus believes she can help him accomplish something that ordinary astral projectors can't. He wants to use her as a pathway. But there's another side to Gemma's ability. The power isn't simply a curse, it can also become a weapon. Once Gemma understands what she can do, she becomes much more capable of fighting back. Instead of allowing Cyrus to control the connection, she learns to use it herself. And that's an important part of her character arc. At first, Gemma doesn't fully understand why these supernatural things are happening to her. She doesn't completely understand what being a courier means. She knows something about her is different. But Cyrus understands her ability better than she does. That's what gives him an advantage. He has knowledge, she has potential. But as the story continues, Gemma starts closing that gap. She realizes that her power doesn't have to belong to Cyrus, it belongs to her. And that becomes one of the most important ideas in the movie. Cyrus wants to turn Gemma's gift into a tool. Gemma eventually realizes that she can decide how that gift is used, and that is why she is able to resist him. There's also an important connection between Gemma's ability and the history of the Insidious universe. The franchise has always established that some people are naturally more sensitive to the further. Some can see spirits, some can enter the realm, some can communicate with the dead. And now the movie expands that mythology by introducing the idea of couriers. They aren't simply people who can see the further, they can function as passageways between worlds. That makes them extremely rare and extremely dangerous. It also explains why Cyrus is willing to go to such extreme lengths to get Gemma. He knows that without her, his plan becomes much harder. But with Gemma, he potentially has access to something much bigger. He could manipulate the boundary itself. And that's where the real danger lies. Because if the boundary between the two worlds becomes weak enough, the further could begin affecting the living world on a much larger scale. The supernatural wouldn't have to wait for someone to enter. It could come looking for us. That's the nightmare behind Gemma's power. And it also explains the importance of the red door. The red door has always represented a passage into the further. But Gemma's ability takes that concept one step further. For her, the door isn't simply somewhere she travels through. She can become part of the connection between both sides. That's why the movie isn't simply telling another story about a haunted person. It's expanding the rules of the universe. The danger is no longer only about someone getting trapped inside the further. It's about what happens if the separation between the two worlds starts breaking down. And Gemma is at the center of that problem. So, can Gemma control everything she brings out? Not necessarily. And that's one of the most important limitations of her power. Her ability doesn't mean every entity will obey her. It simply means she has the potential to open a path. Once that path exists, whatever is on the other side can become a threat. That's why Gemma has to learn control. If she uses the ability carelessly, she could make the situation worse. But if she understands it, she can use the same connection to fight back. And that is essentially what happens. Gemma's greatest weakness becomes her greatest advantage. Cyrus thinks her ability makes her controllable. Instead, it gives her a way to challenge him. And that's why Gemma is so important to the future of the Insidious mythology. She isn't just another character who happens to have psychic abilities. She's someone who could potentially change the relationship between the living world and the further. And that opens up some huge possibilities for future stories. Imagine what happens if other people discover that Gemma is a courier. Imagine if someone tries to use her power again. Or imagine if another courier appears who has even greater control over the boundary. Suddenly, the further becomes more dangerous than ever. So, how does Gemma's power actually work? She's a courier with the ability to cross between the real world and the further and potentially bring entities across with her. Her power essentially makes her a living bridge between two worlds. But she doesn't automatically control what comes through. That's why Cyrus wants to exploit her. He sees her as a doorway to the further. Gemma eventually realizes that the same ability can be used against him, and that's the key to understanding her character. Her power isn't simply about entering the further. It's about controlling the boundary between worlds. And once that boundary can be crossed in both directions, the biggest question isn't who can enter the further, it's what happens when the further starts coming out. And that's what makes Gemma's ability one of the most important new additions to the Insidious mythology.